When financial stability becomes a dating requirement, you usually notice it in small moments first. You sit across from someone on a first date, conversation feels natural, jokes land, interest feels mutual. But then the questions begin changing direction. What do you do long term? Do you like where you live? Are you planning your next move? The questions sound casual, but they are building something, a stability profile. And somewhere in the middle of the conversation, you start feeling it. The date is no longer just about connection. It is about risk. And most people never realize the exact moment attraction starts sharing space with financial evaluation. What most people do not notice is how fast stability becomes visible in dating. Nobody says it directly, nobody announces it, but small signals begin doing quiet work. Where you live, how stable your schedule sounds, whether your plans sound temporary or settled, whether your life sounds reactive or structured. People begin listening for these signals without realizing it, because stability answers a question most people do not ask out loud. How risky would it be to build something with this person? This is why conversations begin shifting in subtle ways. Questions about direction, questions about consistency, questions about whether your life looks predictable, not because people stopped caring about attraction, because attraction now shares space with evaluation. And once stability enters the conversation, people begin adjusting how they see your long-term potential without saying it directly. You may notice reactions changing slightly. More interest when your life sounds organized, more hesitation when your situation sounds uncertain, more follow-up questions when your future sounds stable, and fewer when it sounds unclear. Not because people are cold, because people are constantly trying to measure emotional risk without calling it risk. And financial stability quietly becomes one of the fastest signals people use to make that decision. Most people do not develop this preference in dating as adults. They learned it much earlier, in small moments that had nothing to do with romance. The reliable child was trusted more. The responsible child was depended on more. The one who seemed stable became the one problems moved toward, not because they asked for it, because they looked safe. That pattern does not disappear when people start dating. It just changes form. Adults still scan for the same signals they learned to trust early, looking for who feels consistent, looking for who feels grounded, looking for who feels like they won't collapse when pressure appears. Stability becomes attractive not just because of money, because stability feels like emotional safety. And emotional safety often feels more important than excitement when people think long-term. This is why financial direction starts sounding like emotional maturity, and financial uncertainty starts sounding like emotional risk. Not because this is always true, but because people are conditioned to connect stability with safety long before dating ever begins. And once someone begins to feel like a low-risk partner, people often begin imagining futures without even deciding to. And once the future enters the picture, stability begins quietly competing with chemistry for influence. This is where a quiet tension often begins, because attraction does not disappear when stability becomes important, but priorities can start shifting. Someone may still feel chemistry, still feel interest, still feel connection, but at the same time, they may begin asking a different question. Could this person support a future that feels stable? And this is where people often feel an internal conflict they rarely talk about, choosing between what feels exciting and what feels secure. Because emotional interest may pull one direction, while perceived stability pulls another. And once stability enters the conversation, people begin adjusting how they present themselves, talking more about plans, talking more about direction, talking less about uncertainty, not to impress, to avoid being seen as risky. Because once stability becomes part of desirability, people begin managing how safe they appear instead of only how interesting they appear. What changes is not just attraction, it's filtering. Financial stability quietly becomes one of the fastest ways people reduce uncertainty when choosing partners. Not because people are calculating numbers, because people are trying to predict pressure. Who might struggle? Who might adapt? Who might carry more stress into the relationship? Stability begins acting like a shortcut signal, suggesting consistency, suggesting reliability, suggesting fewer unknowns. And once people begin using stability as a signal, dating quietly becomes more selective. Not openly, not intentionally, but through small decisions. More second dates when life sounds stable, more hesitation when life sounds unpredictable, more interest when plans sound structured, less when everything sounds temporary. And most people never realize when financial stability stopped being a bonus and started becoming a silent requirement. Once financial stability becomes part of attraction, behavior often begins adjusting around it, not dramatically, quietly. People may start emphasizing career direction earlier in conversation, highlighting consistency, downplaying uncertainty, not because they changed who they are, because they understand what signals reduce doubt. Dating starts rewarding predictability, rewarding direction, rewarding signs of long-term structure, and this slowly changes what people feel safe showing. Less discussion of instability, less openness about financial pressure, less comfort admitting uncertainty. Because once stability becomes part of desirability, appearing unstable can start to feel like disqualification instead of honesty. And this is where dating begins quietly narrowing behavior. People begin presenting the safest version of themselves instead of the most authentic version, not to deceive, to remain viable. And most never notice how much this changes how people show up long before commitment even begins. And this is where something even quieter begins happening. People may not only evaluate stability, they may begin comparing it. Comparing direction, comparing life structure, comparing who seems easier to build with. Dating quietly becomes less about who someone likes most and more about who feels safest to choose. And this can change how rejection feels, because sometimes what feels personal is actually positional, not always about personality, sometimes about perceived readiness. Because when stability becomes attraction, people are not only asking who they enjoy being with, they are asking who feels easier to imagine a future with. And ease often wins decisions people later explain as chemistry. This is why two people can feel connection and still not continue, because connection answers emotional questions, stability answers practical ones, and practical questions tend to get louder when people begin thinking long-term. Most never say this directly, but it appears in small phrases. Wanting someone established, wanting someone serious, wanting someone ready. These words rarely mean only emotional readiness. They often mean structural readiness. And once structural readiness becomes part of attraction, people begin feeling pressure to look prepared before they feel prepared. Because in modern dating, appearing stable can start opening doors faster than becoming stable. Most people still believe dating is mostly about connection, and connection still matters, but the environment around dating has changed. Stability now answers questions people may not even realize they're asking, not about attraction, about future pressure. Because when people think about long-term relationships, they are often thinking about what life will feel like under stress, and financial stability has quietly become one of the fastest ways people try to predict that. Which means sometimes what looks like attraction is also reassurance, and what feels rejection may sometimes be uncertainty, not about who someone is, about what their future might feel like. And the uncomfortable question many people eventually face is not whether stability matters, it's whether dating is slowly becoming a place where emotional connection starts after financial safety is already assumed. And if that is happening, the question becomes even harder. Not whether stability should matter, but how much of attraction today is shaped by what feels safe rather than what feels real.